This historical record captures a high-intensity confrontation during a pivotal Senate confirmation hearing, where Senator Amy Klobuchar directed a rigorous line of questioning toward Kash Patel regarding his fitness to spearhead the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The exchange served as a primary theater for the clash between the entrenched administrative state and a reformist vision dedicated to dismantling perceived bureaucratic overreach within our nation's premier law enforcement agency. Throughout the proceedings, the dialogue remained hyper-focused on a curated history of Patel's most assertive public statements, which supporters view as a necessary challenge to a status quo that has long evaded meaningful oversight. Specifically, the inquiry delved into his previous assertions concerning the integrity of the electoral process and his unwavering stance against systemic corruption that many conservatives believe has taken root in the upper echelons of the federal government. Rather than a mere resume review, this session functioned as a scrutiny of Patel's commitment to holding political actors and media figures accountable for their roles in eroding the foundations of American justice. During the most pointed segments of the interrogation, Patel maintained a composed posture while frequently clarifying that he did not have the specific, hand-picked documents being cited by the committee immediately before him. He pointedly argued that his previous remarks were being weaponized through a process of selective editing, stripped of their original context to manufacture a narrative of extremism. To those aligned with the constitutionalist movement, his responses highlighted a persistent frustration with how the legislative establishment uses soundbites to obscure a candidate's genuine intent to restore the rule of law. Patel emphasized that his calls for accountability were never rooted in personal animus, but were instead directed at the institutional failures that have allowed political bias to influence federal investigations. This defense underscored a broader Republican sentiment that the current leadership in Washington is more interested in protecting its own than in allowing a transparent audit of its past actions. The discussion further veered into peripheral territory as the senator attempted to scrutinize Patel's involvement in the private sector, specifically his promotion of nutritional supplements as a means to question his professional judgment. This line of attack was viewed by proponents as a diversionary tactic intended to overshadow his extensive experience in national security and his intimate knowledge of the intelligence community's inner workings. Similarly, the hearing addressed Patel's visionary proposal to decommission the aging J. Edgar Hoover building and transform the site into a public museum dedicated to the history of law enforcement. From a conservative decentralization perspective, this suggestion represents a symbolic and practical move to move the seat of power away from the DC swamp and closer to the American people. Patel's advocates argue that such a transition would signify a fresh start for an agency that many feel has become too insulated from the values of the citizens it is sworn to protect. While Senator Klobuchar sought to frame these long-standing grievances as evidence of a personal vendetta against the Bureau, her characterization failed to account for the deep-seated desire for reform shared by millions of Americans. The narrative pushed by the opposition attempted to paint a picture of a man driven by retribution, yet this ignores the principled argument that true loyalty to an institution requires the courage to excise its internal corruption. In the eyes of his supporters, Patel is not an enemy of the FBI, but a champion for its rank-and-file members who want to see the agency return to its nonpartisan roots. The tension in the room reflected a fundamental disagreement over whether the FBI should continue on its current path or undergo the radical transparency that Patel has consistently advocated for throughout his career. This ideological divide remains the crux of the debate over the future of American domestic intelligence and the limits of executive power. The session reached a significant turning point with the formal submission of a letter of support signed by dozens of highly decorated former FBI special agents who have served on the front lines. These veteran law enforcement professionals stated unequivocally that Patel possesses the unique qualifications and the necessary grit to execute the difficult reforms the agency desperately needs. Their endorsement served as a powerful counter-narrative to the political attacks, suggesting that those with the most intimate knowledge of the Bureau's culture actually favor Patel's leadership. By concluding with this professional validation, the hearing demonstrated that the call for change is coming from within the law enforcement community itself, not just from political outsiders. This substantial backing reinforces the Republican argument that Patel is the right leader to restore the prestige and impartiality of the nation's most powerful investigative body. The ideological chasm between the two parties widened significantly as the hearing turned toward Patel's ambitious blueprint for a comprehensive reorganization of the Bureau's command structure. Republican leadership has long argued that the concentration of investigative power within the District of Columbia has fostered an environment ripe for political interference and a deep state mentality. Patel's proposal to decentralize the FBI into 3 distinct regional hubs is viewed by his supporters as a vital step toward breaking the grip of the permanent Washington bureaucracy. This strategy is designed to reallocate seasoned investigators from administrative roles in the capital to field offices across the heartland, where they can more effectively combat violent crime. By shifting the Bureau's gravitational center, the nominee intends to ensure that federal resources are directly serving American communities rather than sustaining a self-serving political echo chamber. The current centralized model in Washington, D.C., has historically allowed for a dangerous insularity that distances the Bureau from the common sense of the American public. Proponents of Patel's vision argue that a dispersed agency is inherently more difficult to weaponize against the citizenry for partisan gain. This transition would effectively dismantle the cliques of senior leadership that have often prioritized their own institutional survival over the constitutional rights of the people. Moving the operational focus to regions like the Midwest or the South ensures that the FBI's priorities align with the actual safety concerns of local families. Consequently, this geographic shift serves as a structural safeguard, reinforcing the principle that no federal agency should be beyond the reach or the oversight of the tax-paying public. A major flashpoint emerged regarding the fate of the J. Edgar Hoover Building, which Patel has famously suggested should be shuttered and repurposed as a museum. This symbolic gesture carries immense weight for the America First movement, representing a clean break from a legacy of overreach and the beginning of a more accountable era. Supporters point out that the current headquarters has become a multi-billion-dollar burden on taxpayers, whereas Patel's plan to utilize existing facilities like the Ronald Reagan Building would save the public treasury staggering sums. The nominee argued that the modern FBI does not require a monolithic fortress in the heart of D.C. to fulfill its mission of defending the homeland and upholding the Constitution. Instead, he envisions a leaner, more agile force that operates with the transparency required to finally earn back the trust of a skeptical American public. The J. Edgar Hoover Building has long stood as a brutalist monument to an era where federal power expanded without sufficient checks or balances. By advocating for its closure, Patel is signaling that the era of business as usual at the highest levels of federal law enforcement is officially over. This proposal is not merely about real estate. It is a profound declaration that the FBI must be reborn as an agency of service rather than an agency of control. Critics who view this as a threat to institutional stability fail to recognize that the institution's current path has already alienated half of the American electorate. Real reform requires bold, physical changes that demonstrate a commitment to a new chapter of humility and constitutional adherence within the federal ranks. The hearing also scrutinized Patel's commitment to an unprecedented level of transparency, a cornerstone of the Republican platform's demand for oversight. Under his leadership, the FBI has already outpaced previous administrations by producing tens of thousands of pages of internal documents for congressional review in record time. This aggressive disclosure is framed by proponents as a necessary housecleaning to expose the partisan origins of past investigations that targeted conservative figures and movements. Patel maintains that the era of hiding behind classified labels to shield bureaucratic errors or political bias from public view must come to an immediate and permanent end. For many on the committee, this willingness to open the books is the ultimate proof that Patel is acting as a faithful steward of the people's right to know. Transparency is the only effective antidote to the rot of corruption that many believe has festered in the shadows of the intelligence community. By declassifying information that has been used to manipulate public opinion, Patel is empowering the American people to judge the facts for themselves. This approach stands in stark contrast to the previous culture of secrecy, where the need to know was often used to protect incompetent or malicious actors. Every document released is a step toward restoring the credibility of an agency that has been battered by scandals involving surveillance of political campaigns. Supporters view this commitment as the single most important qualification for any director who hopes to lead the FBI into a post-partisan future. Addressing the accusations of a partisan purge, Patel's defenders characterized his personnel decisions as a long overdue removal of government gangsters who have weaponized their positions for years. From the Republican perspective, an agency cannot be reformed if the very individuals responsible for its loss of impartiality remain in high-level career posts. The nominee's focus on streamlining the workforce is seen not as a vendetta, but as a standard management practice used to realign an underperforming organization with its core legal mandate. This process involves stripping away layers of redundant middle management and refocusing the Bureau on traditional investigative work, such as counterterrorism and dismantling transnational criminal organizations. By prioritizing merit and mission over ideological conformity, Patel aims to rebuild the FBI into a premier, non-partisan force that honors its oath to the law. The term purge is often used by the media to scare the public, but in reality, it describes the necessary process of holding underperformers accountable. No private corporation would allow its managers to actively undermine the mission of the CEO without facing immediate consequences. For too long, federal employees have enjoyed a level of job security that has insulated them from the consequences of their own biases. Patel's willingness to demand excellence and loyalty to the Constitution is exactly what is required to drain the metaphorical swamp. The result will be a reinvigorated FBI, staffed by men and women who are dedicated to the law rather than to their own political agendas. As the session progressed, the discussion touched upon the cultural shift Patel intends to implement, specifically targeting the elimination of woke diversity and equity initiatives. Critics on the left claim these programs are essential for modern policing, but Patel and his allies contend they serve only to distract from the agency's critical national security functions. The Republican-led vision emphasizes a return to blind justice, where investigations are driven solely by evidence of criminal activity rather than social engineering goals. Patel has stated that the only way to insulate the Bureau from political wins is to foster a culture of strict adherence to investigative guidelines and evidentiary standards. This shift back to foundational principles is what his supporters believe will ultimately protect the civil liberties of all Americans, regardless of their political affiliation. The obsession with identity politics within the federal workforce has only served to divide agents and erode the esprit de corps necessary for effective law enforcement. When an agency prioritizes social optics over the pursuit of hardened criminals, the safety of the American people is inevitably compromised. Patel's back-to-basics approach focuses on training agents to be the most proficient investigators in the world, unburdened by ideological indoctrination. This philosophy ensures that every American who interacts with the FBI can expect to be treated based on the facts of their case, not their demographic profile. By removing these distractions, the FBI can finally return to its primary role as the shield of the Republic against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Patel's testimony also touched upon the necessity of reforming the FISA process to ensure that the surveillance of American citizens is never again based on fabricated evidence. He argued that the current system is too easily exploited by those with a political axe to grind, as seen in the infamous Crossfire Hurricane investigation. The nominee proposed strict new penalties for any federal officer who provides misleading information to a secret court. This focus on civil liberties is a core tenet of the modern conservative movement, which seeks to protect the Fourth Amendment from government overreach. Supporters see Patel as the only candidate with the courage to challenge the surveillance state from within. The abuse of the FISA courts is perhaps the most egregious example of how the FBI's power can be turned against the people it is supposed to serve. Patel has first-hand experience in uncovering these abuses, having played a key role in the investigation that exposed the flaws in the Russiagate narrative. His plan to overhaul the warrant application process would require multiple levels of verification and personal accountability for every signature. This reform is not about weakening the FBI's ability to fight terrorism, but about ensuring that that power is never misused against political opponents. By creating a system of real consequences for misconduct, Patel is building a durable framework for future accountability. The hearing further addressed Patel's stance on the prosecution of violent crime, particularly the rise of retail theft and gang-related violence in major cities. He criticized the current focus on white-collar political targets while everyday Americans are suffering from a decline in law and order. His plan involves shifting federal assets to support local police departments that have been demoralized by the defund the police movement. This reallocation of resources would prioritize the safety of American streets over the political interests of the DC elite. Proponents argue that this is the people's FBI, an agency that cares more about the safety of a corner store in Ohio than the reputations of lobbyists in Washington. The breakdown of law and order in American urban centers is a direct result of the federal government losing its focus on the primary mission of safety. Patel understands that the FBI possesses unique tools that can be used to dismantle the cartels and gangs that fuel the fentanyl crisis. By partnering with local sheriffs and police chiefs, the FBI can act as a force multiplier for those who are on the front lines every day. This vision of collaborative, mission-driven law enforcement is exactly what the Republican base has been demanding for years. It represents a fundamental shift away from the elitist, top-down approach that has characterized federal law enforcement for too long. Throughout the intense questioning, Patel remained firm in his belief that the Department of Justice must be stripped of its partisan lenses. He spoke passionately about the two-tiered system of justice that has seen peaceful protesters prosecuted while violent agitators are often ignored. This perception of unfairness is a poison that undermines the legitimacy of our entire legal system. Patel's goal is to restore a single standard of justice that applies equally to the powerful and the powerless alike. His commitment to this principle is why he has earned the respect of so many who feel abandoned by the current administration. The existence of a two-tiered justice system is not just a political talking point. It is a lived reality for many Americans who see their values being criminalized. Patel's leadership would send a clear message that the law is not a weapon to be used against one's enemies. By ensuring that investigations are conducted with total impartiality, he can begin to heal the deep divisions that currently plague the country. This effort to restore public trust is the most difficult task he faces, but it is also the most essential for the survival of the Republic. Only a leader who is unafraid of the establishment can hope to bring about such a profound transformation. The support from veteran FBI agents mentioned earlier in the session was not just a formality. It was a testament to Patel's reputation among those who do the actual work. These agents have seen firsthand how political leadership can demoralize the rank and file and compromise the mission. They recognize in Patel a director who will have their backs when they are following the law and doing the right thing. This internal support is crucial because no reform can succeed if the workforce is not on board with the new direction. The endorsement of these veterans provides the moral authority needed to override the complaints of the DC political class. In the final analysis, the hearing demonstrated that Kash Patel is not just a nominee, but a symbol of a larger movement to reclaim the American government. His critics fear him precisely because he knows where the bodies are buried and has the will to dig them up. The Republican members of the committee were unified in their praise for his bravery and his clear-eyed vision for the future. As the session drew to a close, it was evident that the debate over Patel is a debate over the very soul of the federal government. The choice is between a bureau that serves itself or a bureau that serves the Constitution and the American people. The interrogation shifted toward the provocative subject of media accountability, as Senator Klobuchar attempted to frame Patel's calls for transparency as a direct threat to the freedom of the press. From the Republican perspective, however, the nominee's stance represents a necessary corrective to an era where certain media outlets have functioned as de facto communications arms for the administrative state. Patel clarified that his focus remains on those who knowingly disseminate classified information or participate in coordinated leak campaigns to sabotage political opponents. He argued that the First Amendment was never intended to serve as a shield for criminal conspiracies or the deliberate subversion of national security protocols. To his supporters, this is not an attack on journalism, but a demand for a return to the high standards of objective truth-telling that the American public deserves. The narrative of prosecuting journalists was countered by the argument that no one should hold a get-out-of-jail-free card simply because they possess a press credential. Patel pointed out that the current legal framework has often been used selectively to protect favored media personalities while targeting independent voices who challenge the establishment. The Republican-led vision for the Department of Justice emphasizes that if a member of the media is found to be complicit in the illegal mishandling of government secrets, they must face the same scrutiny as any other citizen. This principle of equal application of the law is central to restoring faith in a system that many feel has become hopelessly biased. By stripping away the perceived immunity of the legacy media elite, Patel aims to ensure that the truth is no longer a casualty of political warfare. Furthermore, the hearing delved into the history of lawfare, where the legal system is weaponized to harass and bankrupt political outsiders through endless investigations. Patel's defenders noted that he has been a primary target of these very tactics, which has given him a unique perspective on the need for systemic safeguards. He proposed that the FBI should strictly investigate actual crimes rather than ideological nonconformity, which has been the hallmark of recent years. This shift would prioritize the protection of all American civil liberties, ensuring that the power of the federal government is never again used to silence dissent. Proponents argue that only a director who has survived the gauntlet of partisan attacks can truly understand the urgency of this reform. The discussion then touched upon the nominee's past statements regarding the government gangsters who have allegedly manipulated the justice system for personal or political gain. Patel remained unapologetic, asserting that his commitment is to the rank-and-file agents who are often hamstrung by the political agendas of their superiors. He emphasized that holding high-ranking officials accountable for misconduct is the only way to deter future abuses of power. From a conservative viewpoint, this prosecutorial focus is a vital tool for cleaning up the corruption that has eroded the Bureau's prestige on the world stage. By targeting the architects of past abuses, Patel intends to send a clear message that the era of bureaucratic impunity is officially at an end. The session also addressed the controversial topic of disinformation, with Patel arguing that the government has no business acting as an arbiter of truth for the American people. He criticized the collaborative efforts between federal agencies and big tech companies to censor speech that was later proven to be accurate or at least worthy of public debate. The Republican vision for the FBI involves a complete withdrawal from the business of monitoring misinformation, which many see as a thinly veiled attempt at political censorship. Patel's advocates believe that a free society thrives on the open exchange of ideas, not on the government-mandated suppression of inconvenient facts. This commitment to the First Amendment is presented as a cornerstone of his plan to lead an agency that respects the intelligence of the citizenry. In a particularly pointed exchange, the nominee was asked about his willingness to use the FBI's resources to investigate those who have allegedly lied to the American people. Patel's response focused on the legal definitions of perjury and the intentional obstruction of justice, rather than mere political disagreements. He argued that when government officials lie under oath to Congress or to the courts, they must be held to account regardless of their party affiliation. This stance is seen by his supporters as a courageous step toward ending the culture of Washington lies that has disillusioned so many voters. For the America First movement, this represents a promise to restore the integrity of the federal record and ensure that public servants are actually serving the public interest. The hearing also touched upon the role of independent journalism and the rise of citizen reporters, who have filled the void left by a consolidating media industry. Patel expressed a belief that the democratization of information is a healthy development for the Republic, as it provides a check on the power of traditional gatekeepers. He suggested that the FBI should be just as responsive to the concerns raised by independent investigators as they are to the major networks. This egalitarian approach to information is viewed as a way to bypass the DC echo chamber and engage with the concerns of everyday Americans. By validating the role of the independent press, Patel is signaling his alignment with a broader movement toward decentralized authority and public empowerment. As the debate continued, the focus remained on the tension between national security and the public's right to know. Patel argued that the overclassification of documents is a primary tool used by the bureaucracy to hide its mistakes from the eyes of the taxpayers. He pledged to implement a more aggressive declassification schedule, ensuring that the history of major federal investigations is made available for public scrutiny. This transparency is seen as the ultimate safeguard against the return of the secret police tactics that have plagued previous eras. Supporters believe that sunshine is indeed the best disinfectant for an agency that has spent too long operating in the dark. The session's conclusion regarding the media highlighted the fundamental disagreement over what constitutes a threat to the press versus a demand for accountability. To the critics, Patel's words are a warning. To his supporters, they are a long overdue promise of justice. The nominee's refusal to back down from his call for a transparent and accountable media landscape is interpreted as a sign of strength and conviction. For those who believe the media has become a partisan actor, Patel represents the only leader willing to speak truth to power. This section of the hearing reinforced his image as a disruptor who is unafraid to challenge the most powerful institutions in the country. Finally, the discussion of Patel's professional integrity was bolstered by his history as a public defender and a career prosecutor who has seen the law from both sides. His advocates point to this diverse background as evidence that he understands the gravity of the power he is seeking to wield. He spoke eloquently about the need to protect the little guy from the immense weight of the federal government when it is applied unfairly. This populist framing resonates deeply with a Republican base that feels increasingly targeted by the very agencies meant to protect them. As Part 3 concludes, it is clear that the fight over Patel's nomination is a fight over the transparency of the American government itself. The critical issue of electoral integrity took center stage as the hearing moved toward the FBI's role in overseeing the most sacred process of our republic. Senator Klobuchar attempted to characterize Patel's concerns regarding the 2020 election as conspiracy theories, but the nominee stood firm in his belief that any shadow of doubt in the voting process is an existential threat to national sovereignty. From a Republican perspective, the FBI has a non-negotiable duty to investigate every credible allegation of fraud with the same vigor it applies to any other federal crime. Patel argued that the previous administration of the Bureau was far too quick to dismiss the concerns of millions of Americans who witnessed unprecedented procedural changes in 2020. To his supporters, his commitment to a zero-tolerance policy for election interference, whether foreign or domestic, is the only way to ensure that future results are beyond reproach. The nominee emphasized that safe and secure elections are not just a talking point, but must be a provable reality supported by hard evidence and transparent audits. He criticized the collaborative efforts between federal law enforcement and partisan state officials who sought to stifle legitimate questions about ballot chain of custody and signature verification. Under his leadership, Patel promised to establish a dedicated task force focused exclusively on the integrity of federal elections, ensuring that the Bureau acts as a neutral arbiter rather than a political gatekeeper. This vision resonates deeply with a base that feels the 2020 process was marred by administrative overreach and the unconstitutional altering of rules by unelected bureaucrats. For those who prioritize the one citizen, one vote principle, Patel represents a necessary bulwark against the erosion of our democratic standards. The discussion also touched upon the weaponization of the term disinformation to silence those who sought to report on election irregularities. Patel argued that when federal agencies pressure private companies to censor political speech during an election cycle, they are actively participating in the very rigging they claim to prevent. He pledged that a reformed FBI would never again coordinate with social media giants to suppress stories, such as the Hunter Biden laptop, that are critical to an informed electorate. This commitment to the First Amendment is viewed by his allies as a vital step in dismantling the censorship industrial complex that has grown within the federal government. By protecting the right of all Americans to question their government, Patel is upholding the most basic tenets of a free and open society. Furthermore, the hearing addressed the necessity of securing the border as a component of protecting the integrity of the American vote. Patel and his Republican supporters argued that the influx of millions of undocumented individuals creates a permanent risk of non-citizen voting and identity theft in our electoral system. He suggested that the FBI should work more closely with the Department of Homeland Security to verify the eligibility of those on the voter rolls, ensuring that only legal citizens determine the path of the nation. This approach is framed as a matter of national security, as an insecure border and an insecure ballot are two sides of the same coin of sovereign decline. To his proponents, Patel's holistic view of security is exactly what is needed to restore the confidence of the American people in their institutions. The nominee's past statements about government-led rigging were recontextualized as a warning against the institutional bias that has historically favored the Washington establishment. He pointed out that when the FBI uses fabricated evidence to obtain warrants against political campaigns, it is fundamentally interfering with the democratic process. Patel's goal is to create a culture of total impartiality, where the Bureau's investigative power is used to protect the candidates' rights rather than to destroy them. This shift toward procedural justice is seen as a way to insulate the FBI from the whims of whichever party happens to be in power. By focusing on the letter of the law and the sanctity of the vote, Patel aims to lead an agency that is truly blind to political identity. In a moment of intense clarity, Patel stated that the American people cannot be expected to trust an election result if the federal government is actively hiding the evidence of how that result was achieved. He called for the full disclosure of all federal records related to election security, arguing that secrecy only breeds suspicion and social unrest. This demand for radical transparency is a cornerstone of his plan to heal the deep divisions that have plagued the country since the 2020 cycle. Supporters believe that by opening the books, Patel will allow the truth to emerge and finally put an end to the war of narratives that has destabilized the Republic. For the Republican members of the committee, this was a refreshing departure from the usual bureaucratic obfuscation. The session also explored the use of federal grants to influence how local jurisdictions conduct their elections, a practice that Patel vowed to investigate for potential abuses. He argued that Zuckerbucks and other forms of private funding for public election offices have introduced a dangerous level of partisan influence into the heart of the voting process. A reformed FBI under his watch would examine whether these funds were used to unfairly target certain demographics or to manipulate voter turnout in favor of specific candidates. This focus on dark money in election administration is presented as a crucial part of the fight for a fair and level playing field for all Americans. To his advocates, Patel is the only leader with the courage to follow the money wherever it leads, even into the bank accounts of the DC elite. As the inquiry into election integrity drew to a close, it was clear that Patel views this as his most critical mandate. He argued that without a trustworthy electoral system, all other federal functions are ultimately illegitimate. His plan involves a back-to-basics approach to election law, emphasizing the importance of paper ballots, voter ID, and the elimination of mass mail-in voting, which he believes is ripe for exploitation. While critics labeled this as an attack on voting rights, his supporters saw it as a robust defense of the legal vote. The nominee's refusal to waver on these points reinforced his image as a man of principle who is willing to take on the most sensitive issues in American life. The support for Patel from the Republican base is largely driven by this promise to finally get to the bottom of the issues that have haunted the American psyche for years. For many, his nomination is the first sign that the federal government is taking their concerns seriously rather than treating them with contempt. Patel spoke of the need to protect the grandmother in Pennsylvania and the worker in Michigan who just want to know that their vote actually counted. This populist appeal is a central part of his political identity and a key reason why his confirmation is so highly anticipated by the MAGA movement. By aligning the FBI with the interests of the forgotten voter, Patel is redefining the mission of federal law enforcement for the 21st century. Finally, the session concluded with a discussion on the role of the FBI in preventing foreign actors from influencing American public opinion during an election. Patel argued that while foreign interference is a real threat, it should never be used as a pretext for domestic censorship or for the surveillance of American citizens. He proposed a more surgical approach that identifies specific foreign agents rather than painting broad swaths of the American public as foreign assets. This distinction is critical for those who believe the Russia collusion narrative was a tool used to delegitimize a duly elected president. As Part 4 ends, it is evident that Patel's vision for election security is one of strength, transparency, and a profound respect for the sovereignty of the American voter. The culmination of the hearing was marked by the formal introduction of a powerful letter of support signed by dozens of retired FBI special agents and whistleblowers who have served with distinction. From a Republican perspective, this endorsement is the ultimate rebuttal to the partisan attacks leveled by the committee's minority members. These veteran investigators argued that Patel is uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between the agency's storied history and the modern need for radical transparency. They praised his cop-first mentality, which seeks to empower the rank and file by removing the bureaucratic obstacles that have long stifled effective criminal investigations. For many on the committee, this collective voice of experience provided the moral clarity needed to confirm a director who is unafraid to challenge the status quo. The letter specifically highlighted Patel's extensive background as a public defender and national security prosecutor as evidence of his profound respect for the constitutional rights of all citizens. His supporters in the law enforcement community believe that his outsider status is actually his greatest asset, allowing him to identify and excise the rot of political bias without being beholden to internal power structures. The nominee's commitment to letting good cops be cops was echoed by these veterans as the essential remedy for an agency currently gripped by a crisis of morale and public trust. They pointed to his past successes in dismantling international terror cells as a testament to his tactical brilliance and his unwavering dedication to the mission of safety. By validating Patel's credentials, these agents signaled that the call for reform is not just political rhetoric but a professional necessity. As the final arguments were presented, the debate returned to the fundamental question of whether the FBI should be an independent force for justice or a tool for the permanent political class. Patel's concluding remarks focused on his pledge to lead a de-weaponized and depoliticized agency that adheres strictly to a single standard of justice for every American. He reiterated that his vision for a decentralized FBI is designed to protect the Bureau from the corrupting influence of the DC political machine. Proponents view this as a transformative moment in American history, where the power of the administrative state is finally being checked by a leader who answers to the people. To his allies, Patel is the embodiment of the accountability that has been missing from federal law enforcement for far too long. The Republican-led majority emphasized that confirming Patel is a critical step in restoring the integrity of our national security apparatus after years of systemic failure. They argued that the fear-mongering from the opposition is a natural reaction from those who benefit from a lack of oversight and a culture of secrecy. Under Patel's leadership, the Bureau will refocus its vast resources on traditional crime fighting, such as taking down violent cartels and ending the fentanyl epidemic that ravages American families. This shift in priorities is framed as a return to the FBI's core mandate, to protect the life, liberty, and property of the American taxpayer. For the millions of citizens who feel ignored by Washington, this represents a long-awaited victory for the rule of law. The session concluded with a sense of historic significance, as the path was cleared for a director who promises to be the most consequential reformer in the agency's history. Patel's journey from a defender of the indigent to the nominee for the nation's top investigative post is seen as a uniquely American story of service and resilience. His supporters believe that his tenure will be defined by a renewed era of transparency that finally puts an end to the secret police tactics of the past. As the hearing adjourned, the consensus among the reform-minded members was that the FBI is on the precipice of a new chapter of greatness. The mission is clear: to rebuild the Bureau into an institution that is once again worthy of the American people's trust.